You were told you were special, but now you feel stuck while everyone else is passing you by. That gifted label wasn't a head start, it was a psychological trap that made you terrified of being mediocre. To actually succeed, you have to kill your ego and learn how to work. Relatable scenario. You have a deadline. It's real, it matters, and you've known about it for weeks. You sit down at your desk. You open the document, and then, almost immediately, something shifts. A quiet resistance settles in like weather. You close the tab. You tell yourself you'll come back to it when your head is clearer. You make tea. You reorganize something that didn't need reorganizing. Hours pass, and when you finally return to that blank page, the guilt is so loud it's hard to think. This isn't laziness. It doesn't feel like laziness, even to you. It feels more like standing at the edge of a diving board, knowing how to swim, but frozen anyway. And what makes it worse is this. You remember a time when things came easily, when you didn't have to try as hard as everyone else, when the answer arrived before the effort did. So where did that person go? Here is what society has gotten profoundly wrong about you. The story told about people who struggled to perform in adulthood, especially people who showed early promise, is that they peaked too soon, or that they were never as smart as everyone thought, or that talent without discipline is just wasted potential. That story is not only cruel, it's inaccurate, and it misses something much more interesting happening underneath. Stereotypes versus reality. The stereotype of the gifted underachiever is almost cultural mythology at this point. The brilliant student who couldn't hold a job, the prodigy who burned out, the once promising writer who never finished the book. We frame these stories as cautionary tales about arrogance or squandered gifts. We shake our heads, we move on. But here's what the research quietly tells us, and I say quietly because it rarely makes the headlines. Carol Dweck, a psychologist at Stanford, spent decades studying what separates people who thrive under pressure from people who collapse under it. And what she found wasn't about intelligence at all. It was about what people believed intelligence meant. Children who were praised for being smart rather than for the effort they put in developed what she called a fixed mindset. They began to see every challenge as a referendum on their identity. Every difficult task became a potential exposure, a chance to be found out. Think about what that does to a person over time. If you were the child who always understood things quickly, who was called gifted, advanced, exceptional, your brain quietly built an equation. Intelligence equals who I am. And if intelligence is fixed, then effort becomes threatening. Because if you try hard and still fail, the story you've built about yourself begins to crack. So what does a mind do when it's trying to protect itself? It avoids. Not because it's lazy, because avoidance is the logical defense mechanism of a mind that has tied its worth to its performance. That's not a character flaw. That is a rational, if ultimately limiting, response to an irrational lesson that was taught very early. Deep exploration. There's a concept in neuroscience called ego depletion, and while it's been debated and refined over the years, the core insight remains useful. Decision-making, willpower, and starting difficult tasks all draw from a shared cognitive resource. When that resource is under stress, when you're anxious about what the outcome of your work says about you, the brain conserves energy by stalling. It doesn't start.
But here's where it gets more interesting. For people with high cognitive ability, this stalling can look sophisticated. It can look like research, planning, reading, preparing. You might spend 3 hours learning about a topic you were supposed to be writing about and feel, in some dim way, productive. This isn't procrastination in the crude sense of watching television and ignoring your responsibilities. This is something more nuanced. It's the mind seeking stimulation in a low-stakes environment while avoiding the high-stakes vulnerability of actually producing something that can be judged. Leonardo da Vinci left dozens of paintings unfinished. He filled thousands of pages with observations, diagrams, plans, questions. He was, by almost every measure, one of the most curious and capable minds in recorded history. He was also, by almost every practical measure, someone who struggled enormously to complete commissioned work on time. The people who hired him were frequently frustrated, and yet history remembers him as a genius, not a procrastinator. That's not to suggest you're Leonardo, but it's worth asking what lens we use when we look at the same behavior in different people and why. Because the person who can't start their work project might be running the same internal process as the Renaissance polymath who kept abandoning paintings to study the flight patterns of birds. Not the same talent, but the same internal architecture, a mind that demands meaning before it offers effort. And here is where the gifted student mythology becomes genuinely damaging. In school, meaning arrived automatically. The work was novel enough, the feedback quick enough, the validation immediate enough that the mind stayed engaged. You were probably rarely bored for long before something more interesting came along. The system was calibrated, almost accidentally, for exactly the kind of mind you had. Then adulthood arrived, and adulthood, to put it plainly, is full of repetitive, unexciting, ambiguous work that doesn't come with a teacher to tell you you're on the right track. No one grades your spreadsheet with a gold star. No one tells you that your email was exceptional. The feedback loops stretch out into weeks and months and sometimes years, and a mind that was trained to move quickly, to seek novelty, to resist boredom, now finds itself in an environment that was not built for it at all. So it stalls, not because it can't work, because no one ever taught it how to work without the original conditions it was built in. Self-reflection moment. I want to pause here and invite you to sit with something. Not to diagnose yourself, not to explain away anything uncomfortable, but simply to look. When you avoid something that matters to you, what is the feeling underneath the avoidance? Not the justification, not the story you tell yourself, the actual felt sense of it. For some people, it's fear, a quiet, unremarkable fear that what they produce won't be good enough, that the gap between their taste and their ability, as the writer Ira Glass once described, will be visible to everyone. That trying fully and failing would be more devastating than not trying at all, because at least in not trying, the potential remains intact. For others, it's something closer to grief, a mourning for the version of themselves who didn't have to try, for whom things arrived easily and naturally. That person felt almost magical, and this person, the adult person sitting at the desk, feels ordinary. And ordinary, after being told your whole life that you are not ordinary, can feel like a kind of loss. Neither of these is weakness. Both of them are deeply human, and both of them are worth looking at with honesty rather than judgment. The question isn't whether you are capable. You know you are capable. The question is what it costs you emotionally to act on that capability when the outcome is uncertain. Because that cost is real. And until you understand what it is and where it came from, you will keep paying it without knowing why. Reframing the core idea. Here is what I want you to consider. The struggle you feel isn't a sign that something went wrong with you. In a strange way, it's a sign that something went very deeply right. You have a mind that cares about quality, that holds high standards, that can see the gap between where something is and where it could be. That is not a liability. That is the raw material of every meaningful thing ever created.
The issue is not the standard. The issue is the relationship between the standard and the self. Abraham Lincoln, who failed at business, lost elections, and lived with what we might now recognize as profound depression, once said something that has stayed with me. He talked about the necessity of being honest with oneself, even when that honesty is uncomfortable. Not punishing honesty, not the kind of honesty that tears you down, but the clear-eyed, quiet kind that says, this is where I am, this is what I'm doing, and I can choose differently. That kind of self-knowledge is not the same as self-improvement. It's not about becoming a more productive version of yourself or optimizing your morning routine. It's about understanding the actual architecture of your resistance without shame, so that the resistance loses some of its power. The gifted label didn't give you a work ethic because it didn't need to. And now you're an adult building one from scratch, which is harder and slower and more humbling than the people around you seem to realize. That's not failure. That's the real work, the work beneath the work. And here's the quiet truth at the center of all of this. The people who do great things in adulthood are rarely the ones who found it easy. They're the ones who learned, often painfully and late, how to keep going when it wasn't easy anymore. Not through willpower alone, and not through motivation, which comes and goes like weather, but through something steadier. A tolerance for the ordinary middle of difficult things, a willingness to produce imperfect work in motion rather than perfect work in theory. That capacity is not given to you, it's built. And unlike intelligence, it cannot peak, it only deepens. So here is the thing I want you to carry out of this video. You are not behind, you are not broken, you are not the cautionary tale. You are someone who was handed a story about yourself very early, a story about what you were worth and where that worth came from, and you have been living inside that story ever since. Some of it was beautiful, some of it was a cage. The work now is not to try harder, it's to understand better, to look at the patterns without flinching, to understand what they were protecting you from, and to slowly, without forcing anything, build a different relationship with the uncomfortable reality of doing things that matter before you know how they'll turn out. That is not a self-help prescription. That is just the quiet, undramatic truth of how people who were once told they were exceptional eventually become people who are actually, sustainably doing exceptional work. And if something in this video felt uncomfortably familiar, if you found yourself nodding at the wrong moments or feeling seen in a way that was slightly irritating, then the next video is going to be worth your time. Because we're going to go deeper into why the fear of mediocrity is often more paralyzing than the fear of failure, and what it actually takes to move through it. That's where this conversation continues.